Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karina. I'm from the English Matura Express team. Tonight's topic on a very late Monday, as always, is the media. I will try to talk you through what I think is a very big topic, and I'll try to, well, talk about newspapers, internet, and radio with you. Okay, as I said, the topic is the media, which is an umbrella term, an Überbegriff, as we say in German, for a good many different things. There is what is called the traditional media and the new media, which you will probably know more about than I do. I'm a very big fan of the traditional media, not so much about the new ones really. So I'll try and talk you through some concepts that concern newspapers, especially because they're probably the most traditional type of media. I will also briefly talk about television, obviously. The radio, which is, I think, one of the media that sometimes tends to be forgotten. I hear that very frequently in my exams, that people, when talking about the media, kind of forget the radio, which is fair enough. Like, I guess people don't listen to the radio that much anymore, but it used to be quite influential. And I'll also quickly touch upon the internet and the internet as a medium and blogs as like a means of communication and so on and so forth. But then I guess you guys know more about that than I do. As I said, I'm quite old-fashioned in terms of media. I will talk, it's a content stream, so there's a lot of like information input, theoretical input. The live chat is open, as it always is. If there are any questions that you have, or if there is something that you know about the topic that I don't, please let me know. Just punch it in. My colleague will then tell me what you have to say. As I said, there is a couple of points that I kind of left open. So if you have any ideas, just punch them in. Good. We start with the types. Okay, well, almost. Hello. I guess you get a pick, you know now why I don't like the new media. I'm like, even a simple computer and even a simple Word file is too much for me. Anyway, we start with the print media, which is, well, one of the oldest forms of media really. Print media are newspapers and magazines. For our purposes, probably more newspapers than magazines, because magazines tend to be very specialized. I guess those of you who are into sports or into like healthy living and healthy lifestyle, you guys might read all those lifestyle and health magazines. Exist both like for girls and for boys. But then media is more than like only very specialized, very focused magazines. There's also magazines about all different types of pastimes, about all different types of hobbies out there. There's magazines about cars and so on and so forth. But they are very like specialized, as I said. Usually financed by advertising. So if you read a car ad, or if you read a car magazine, you see a good many car ads, obviously. That's how the magazines finance themselves. But then this is not the main focus. In your exams, you may be asked about the two different types of newspapers that there are, apart from like the broader categories of daily newspapers and weekly newspapers. There's also monthly newspapers, but I don't know if there are that many in Austria. I think on a monthly basis there's more magazines than newspapers. In some countries, like in the States, for example, you get monthly newspapers as well. They would then be like huge volumes of something. Usually the very good newspapers have that, so there would be a monthly New York Times, for example. It's like kind of a special feature kind of thing. But I don't think that we have them in Austria really. So there's print media. You probably have come across the two main types. They exist in probably all countries in the world, especially in England, or I think in England the contrast is like the biggest. There is what we call tabloid newspapers and what we call broadsheet newspapers. I think broadsheet is quite self-explanatory, kind of explains itself. That's the big newspapers, like the ones that come in very, very big format. The ones that when the person next to you reads them on the train or on the bus, they like take up a lot of space and you're kind of annoyed by them. In Austria, this would be newspapers like the Presse and the Standard. They are quite big newspapers, so if you unfold them, you take up quite a lot of sitting space. So that's the broadsheets. That's usually the newspapers that are considered higher quality. They would mainly discuss, economy, politics. They also do have a sports section, of course, because all the newspapers do. But they treat more serious topics, I guess. There's hardly any gossip in them. They are not very interested in Hollywood celebrities and I don't know who dates who and who got a divorce from who. So that is not what broadsheet newspapers talk about. They do talk about society events. So I'm not very much into society events. What was a big one in the past couple of weeks? Prince Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle, for example. That would be something that both types of newspapers would treat. That would also find a space in a broadsheet newspaper, but not so much. It doesn't take up that much space. There's not that many pictures. It's just pieces of information mainly. As opposed to the tabloid newspapers, that's the bad newspapers. That's the one that treat all the gossip that there is. There is a few very prominent examples, like the Bild-Zeitung in Germany, for example. They have a lot of pictures, bold letters for headlines and so on and so forth, and comparatively little text. So there's not that much information, but there's an awful lot of pictures. But that probably leads us further than we want. I'll come back to the thing with the pictures a little later, maybe, if there's time. But in any case, so we have tabloids versus broadsheet newspapers. I'll write down the word for you, tabloid versus broad. The typing thing works exceptionally well today. No spelling mistakes so far. So tabloids are, in Austria, tabloid newspapers would be the Kronenzeitung, for example, or what's the other one called? Heute and Österreich. Usually the ones that you get for free when you enter a train station, for example, or the ones that you get for free on the Vienna subway. That would be tabloid newspapers, whereas you have to buy broadsheets or get subscriptions to them. You usually also don't get them at the Sunday newspaper stands next to the road. So that's also one of the differences between tabloids and broadsheets. So tabloid, like the smaller ones, they have a quite small format. They're quite, like, comparatively more convenient, quite easy to read. You can read them everywhere you want. As compared to the broadsheets, fewer pictures, more text, and, well, more high quality information, if you want to put it that way, more serious information kind of thing. What else is there in terms of print media? I guess that also books count as print media still, but then we would probably not regard them as print media as such, but they definitely are. Per definition, everything that conveys, like, information, that gives you information, is media. So I guess books count, but then it's not very likely that you in your exams have to talk about books, really, or not in this context at least. What else is there to say about print media? I think that one question that could come up in your oral exams is whether or not you think that the usage of, like, standard newspapers, like newspapers in paper, not on mobile phones or tablets or anything similar if that has gone down, yes or no. They might ask you for your own reading habits, like do you read newspapers? If not, where do you get your information from? Like we live in a society where there is like the access to information is quite easy, really. I think that comparatively few people nowadays read newspapers. I don't think that any of my friends really have subscriptions to any newspapers, but they still do get their information from somewhere. The question is from where. So that could be a question for you in the exams, like where do you get your information from? How do you have, like, why do you have all the political knowledge that you have, and so on and so forth? When was the last time that you like actually read a magazine or a newspaper that you had in your hands, kind of thing? So be prepared for questions like that. Maybe you don't want to say that you never read newspapers, maybe not a very advisable strategy in your exams. The broadcast media, that's the umbrella term again. Broadcast media is television and the radio. I think television is quite clear nowadays. Oh, I skipped the... Oh. Well, I can add that here. Anyway, broadcast media are TV and radio. Of course, on television we have classical, like in terms of how do we get information, we have classical news shows like the Zeitbild in Austrian television, for example. That's news channels that are, well, comparatively like independent. They are there to give us as much information as possible, as much unbiased information as possible. In most countries, radio and television stations, or in a good many countries, TV and radio channels are independent, so they broadcast whatever they want, like whatever news is out there. There are also some countries and some channels and some radio stations that are kind of connected to some like political parties and stuff. They would then rather, you know, broadcast news that are in favor of the respective parties. But that's a whole different story, the whole like media credibility and so on and so forth. That would fill an extra stream, I guess. Something that holds true for both print media and broadcast media is the yellow press journalism. That's like a word that comes out of journalism, obviously. So that's a special term, a Fachausdruck that comes from like newspapers and broadcasts. Media, yellow press journalism is simply all the gossip that is out there. So the yellow press is the kind of news that we get about, I don't know, I'm so bad with celebrities. The Kardashians, for example. Like they are, obviously there's a good many people out there who are interested in their lives, I don't know why. That's yellow press, so all those gossip stories and, I don't know, the quite dirty divorce that Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt are going through at the moment, that would also be yellow press journalism. Also in terms of politics, if the news are not about politics as such, but about the politicians' lives and about what they wear and about the parties that they attend. So like seemingly serious topics, but nothing to do with the real thing. So that's yellow press journalism. And watchdog journalism, as an American term, I don't think that we have that much. Watchdog journalism is the journalism that, or that type of broadcasting, or the type of writing like in the newspapers, that is more political and that kind of takes care that one party in power or one person in power doesn't get too much power. So that would be journalists writing against like other politicians, other parties, so as to not give them all too much voice. So they are kind of the opposition in media. But that's a concept that you may want to do some research on before your exams, so that you... I don't think that it's in your textbooks. I kind of got that from some other sources, So that's where you can prove that, there is some extra textual knowledge that you have. Back to broadcast media, I kind of got a little bit distracted. So we have television, we have classical news shows. Something that is very popular in America that we don't really have in terms of broadcast media is talk shows, but not talk shows in the sense that we know them. So I'm not talking about talk shows like Oprah Winfrey or Jerry Springer or what's the one? We don't really have talk shows, do we? Austria doesn't really have talk shows, no? No. Anyway, talk shows, you know what a talk show is. In America, we have stuff like political talk shows. So it would be the host who is usually very well informed about politics. They are usually politicians/journalists who work for the CNN or the BBC or whatever, who would then interview politicians, but on a very serious level. So it's not like only some chatting about the lives of the politicians or whatever. You get that sometimes too, but it's like really serious, proper journalism, but done on television. There's also a TV show that really has some hot seats for the politicians. They get interrogated on a quite heavy basis. They are asked very spontaneous questions, very difficult questions as well. We don't have a format like that, but that's very popular in America and would definitely fall in the category of broadcast media. So talk shows, but serious talk shows. What else do we have in terms of media? That is television. Well, I think that's everything when it comes to information as such. Something that we don't do that much, but something that you see again in America quite frequently, sometimes also in England, the BBC and the CNN tend to do that. You hear the news, but then you also have the most current news in kind of like subtitles at the bottom end of your screen, so you get quite a lot of information. I don't think that we really do that in Austria, but you have information about sports, and in the bottom end corner or at the bottom end of the screen, you have the latest stock exchange news, or you have the latest political news in terms of the latest news, like the latest developments in some crisis, in some areas of crisis, or about the refugees and so on and so forth. So a lot of inputs in one picture. Austrian television doesn't really do that much. Radio. I think one of the more like a forgotten type of media, I would say. I don't think that many people listen to the radio. Do you listen to the radio?
No.
Nope, he doesn't listen to the radio. You can't see him, but there's someone else there. He just proved my point, kind of. We don't listen to the radio that much anymore. Those of you who drive and who drive like considerably longer distances, you maybe or might listen to the radio a bit more. I guess that's what people do in the cars. But then radio was very popular a while ago. Good many years ago, radio was the source of entertainment, the source of news for the people. Also, after the advent of television, simply because television stations or like a TV set at home was quite expensive for a while, so people would still resort to news on the radio. It was also very influential in terms of politicians used it a lot with mainly psychological backgrounds, I think, because everything that you hear is very memorable for you. Like voices, we tend to remember voices and we tend to recognize voices as well. So the radio was very popular in terms of campaigning. They would also always put people with a very memorable voice on television, and they on the radio, sorry, and they would then talk to you, and you'd highly likely remember what they had to say. So the radio was used a lot for information, but also for political decision making. Also for entertainment. There was a time, especially on British television. Again, I don't really know what it was like in Austria, but on British television, mixing it up all the time. On British radio, there we go. You could even listen to like full and entire plays. So people would perform, I don't know, Shakespeare's Othello, a short version of it, because it takes, I think, 10 hours or something, if you like play the whole thing. But you'd get parts of some very famous plays on the radio for the entertainment of people, always at times where nowadays you have primetime television. So starting at around 8 after dinner, that's when radio plays would start. So it would be a full 2 hours of listening to the radio for entertainment. Usually very popular plays, so not very heavy stuff, because I guess that's quite hard if you don't have any pictures to go with. But usually quite light entertainment plays. They were, as I said, very popular. Again, I don't know what it was like in Austria, probably the same thing. But they were massively successful in England. There was some playwrights, some Drehbuchautoren who would only write plays for the radio instead of like for the stage. So I guess we must not forget the radio as an entertainment media as well. We still do a lot of entertainment on the radios. There is all those radio shows where like Ö3 does them, and Live Radio, they all have those shows where the hosts interact with the people, where they call them play pranks on the people via the radio. I think one show that everyone knows is where they ask people on the streets like random questions that they can't answer and then make a big fool of themselves, like maybe, well, basically to a live audience. So they ask really easy questions and people give really stupid answers. That's also entertainment, pure entertainment reason. Yeah, and at every full hour, most radio stations still deliver the news, which is a good keyword for me as you are planning on doing your A-levels in February, if I'm informed correctly. FM4 does their news in English, which is something that you may want to listen to at some stage, because it's good for your pronunciation, and I think that they do excellent news, so you get a lot of information also about English-speaking countries, so they would also tell you what's going on in Trump country, in England, and in all those other places, so that might be, a tip for you. I also do the news in French, if you want to improve your French. What else is there to say about the radio? Do we have any questions, anything?
No.
Good. And I can continue talking. The one part that I don't like, or that I don't know that much about, or that I think you know more about than I do, is the internet thing. I think nowadays we get a lot of information via the internet. I think most people also have their newspapers on, like, available on the internet somewhere. Those of you who still have Facebook, you can also kind of subscribe to Austrian news or to any newspaper on Facebook and then get the most important news. I was told by many of my friends that's how they get most of their information, so they would not read the paper thing anymore, but kind of rely on the online versions of the newspapers, which is a good thing. For many good newspapers, you have to pay some sort of like small subscription fee. Many other really good ones, especially the English ones, are for free. So you can access the New York Times, but then that's quite difficult English. But you can also access the Time magazine via Facebook, which is a really good source for information in English, also in quite understandable English, which is important. There are blogs. I guess that there are people who share their opinions and debate and discuss their opinions via blogs, which I have never done. So there's not much that I can tell you about it, but they definitely count as media nowadays. They people post stuff they know and invite other people to like share their opinions, to confirm the opinion or to reject the opinion in like whatever case. But then blogs are nowadays a quite good source of information. So is Twitter, even though that's more of a like one-sided like way of communicating, I guess. But people use Twitter a lot to share news, fake news sometimes. But well, Twitter nowadays is a platform to get information about things. But then the question is, well, who is the source or who was the writer of the whole thing? Is it fake news? Is it credible? But probably you know more about that than I do. So we move on to the purpose of the media, which I think is quite straightforward, which is a quite, well, we know why they are out there. The question is, do we make use of them? Do we make use of them correctly? But of course, mainly the media are sources of information still. We would not know what's going on in the rest of the world was it not for the media. So the internet gives us a lot of information. Newspapers give us a lot of information as well. Every newspaper, regardless of its quality, does also have a foreign politics section. So I guess people who read a tabloid newspaper would at least know what's going on in the world, like roughly. Whether or not the information is high quality is a different story, but you would still know what's going on, where in the world. The same effect you have with the internet. It's quite hard to avoid getting some sort of information about what's going on in the world via any of the channels, really. So I think the media are still our main, like, one and only source of information. I guess most people also watch some kind of news show on TV, unless you're one of those persons who doesn't watch television anymore, who would only resort to Amazon Prime and Netflix. I think there are people like that. But then in commercial breaks or at the end of commercial breaks, you get a lot of like news overviews in especially the German channels. So it's hard to avoid information or getting information. It's the good thing about the media. Whether or not the information is trustworthy or not, that is something that you have to decide for yourself. Like, who is the person who like spread the news? Is it a Twitter account that was found or that was read and that was then made into news? Because then it would not be very trustworthy. If it is a good media station or a good newspaper, then it definitely is. The same holds true for pictures. People have the tendency to believe everything that they see in photographs, but then sometimes photographs are either fake, like they are not real photographs, or they were taken out of context, like you have photographs of a war site, but then it's not the war site that is reported about. So it would be like the newspaper article is about Syria, but the picture that you see is about, I don't know, Afghanistan, whatever. So journalists do that every now and then, obviously, because pictures leave a lot of impression. They don't have a good, like, really convincing picture at hand, so they would take a different one. There's no picture that is dramatic enough to like kind of fit the purpose, so they'd take a different one, which is fake news as well, because it's kind of like portraying the wrong thing, really. So be careful about who the source is. Source, and is your source trustworthy? Source is the English word for the German Quelle, so where do we get it from? Advertisement, I think that's nowadays very important as well. All the online media finance themselves via advertisements only. Facebook is for free, so nobody has to pay membership fees for Facebook. Zuckerberg wants to earn some money as well. I guess he earns most of it with like ads and pop-ups that appear on Facebook that are hard to get rid of. Like, I get a lot of advertisements on my social media accounts, but yeah, as I said, they have to make some money somehow. The same holds true for newspapers. Newspapers largely, or to a great extent, finance themselves by advertisements. Some more than others. That depends on which newspaper it is and who the owner of the newspaper is. But advertisement is a big thing. Everything I talked about now is like for the benefits of the media or of the medium, so the newspaper or Facebook in that case. For us, it's an advantage as well because we see a lot of advertisement, which is something we might find quite annoying, or at least I do. But if it wasn't for the media, we would probably not know what products and services are out there, or at least we wouldn't know about the vast choice of, like, about the different opportunities that we have nowadays. So advertisement on the media is good for us because we know what's out there, basically. We always see new products advertised in newspapers and on Facebook or whatever. I guess also Instagram has advertisements. I think I don't have Instagram, but I think that I can vaguely remember that there's advertisements on Instagram as well. So we are confronted with information about new products or advertisement about new products and basically all the time, which is a good thing, I guess, so that we know what's out there. Politics, of course. Politics nowadays get very frequently discussed, not only in newspapers, like newspapers and television channels. That's what they do. That's their job, like discussing politics. I think information about politics is still something that newspapers and radios and the television does a lot. That's what they're there for. But then political opinion making, I think that's something that goes on in social media a lot. So there is people who are lobbying for one party or the other, or like one political attitude or the other. So usually it's people out there who are very left-wing who would then lobby their causes and try to convince undecided voters to like join the more like left-wing sector. Same holds true for right-wing politicians. Of course, there's a lot of opinion making out there as well. The big battle between left and right that is going on at the moment in Austria, I think, is carried out mainly via social media. Most politicians do have a Facebook account, and they would also not abstain from saying bad things about like their political opponents on a sometimes very low level, as I think. So information about politics, I think, is still something that goes on a lot in the traditional media. Opinion making, so trying to convince people to join either side, like be it left wing or right wing, is done a lot via social media, or so I think. I can only like talk from experience when it comes to Facebook. It's the only social media platform that I have, but there's a lot of political discussions going on. People, well, fighting, like verbal fights on Facebook about different topics. Hardly any topic gets as heated as the refugee discussion at the moment, of course, and you can follow very easily how newspapers of a certain direction try to kind of intervene and post articles. Something that you could do some research on as well, like compare one topic or the treatment of one topic in different newspapers, also online, and also maybe have a look at the comments that people post. I think what I mean by political opinion making will become quite clear after that. So you could do that as a like preparation, as a homework for your exams for the media topic. See how good newspapers treat the topic versus how bad newspapers, how the tabloids treat the topic, and then kind of like compare and contrast the whole thing a little. So opinion making, very much something that the new media do, like trying to pull people to one side. Hey, why is there nothing in my blanks? Anyway, the pros and cons of entertainment media. Very nice. I will try to jot it down in very brief keywords. One thing that I have to say, entertainment media is, or let's start from the other side. When we talk about entertainment media, it's mainly the internet and it's mainly stuff like computer games and all those online like interaction games that you can play together with other people. Whatever advantages and whatever drawbacks people mention, I don't think that there's a lot of scientific proof to any of them. It's more opinions than really scientific knowledge. So whatever advantages or drawbacks it has for you is probably personal experience or personal attitude to the whole thing. The same holds true for the internet in general. Like some people think that the internet is a quite dangerous place, that it is a quite dangerous thing. There's a lot of bad things going on online, but there's also a lot of good things going on. Same holds true for entertainment media, so the television would still count as an entertainment medium. Netflix would nowadays also count as an entertainment medium, but primarily the computer and all those interaction games that, you know, people play. I guess when it comes to advantages, you can, or for both advantages and drawbacks, you can think about something for yourself, I guess. What people usually, what people usually see as an advantage is that, well, it's quite hard really, because you'd have to like separate the whole thing. But if you play multiplayer games, if you play online interactive computer games, then, as I said, they're interactive. You get to know people, or that's at least an argument that my computer game playing friends always bring forward in the discussion. I don't know, don't play any computer games. But you get to know people from a lot of different places, a lot of different countries. You speak English a lot, obviously. That's what my friends tell me. Some of them know all of their English from like computer games, which is quite impressive if that's true. So you get a lot of information, of course, as well. The advantages are quite hard, really, because they are so obvious. I think the advantages of entertainment media is something that is like pretty obvious. They're also quite easy to access. The internet is a big place. You get a lot of information in a very, very short time. I guess go into the newspaper stand and buy in a newspaper, or running across the road on a Sunday to get the Kronenzeitung or the Tiroler Tageszeitung out of those mini pockets next to the road is comparatively harder than switching on the computer and just look up the information that you want. So I guess they're very easy to access. You also get a very broad spectrum of information. Spectrum. So, like hardly anyone reads 10 newspapers a day or whatever. On the internet, you get a broad spectrum of newspapers or television channels. You can compare and contrast. You can see, well, what's the Kronenzeitung saying regarding a certain topic, and what does the Standard say as a comparison. You can also compare it with English newspapers, which is sometimes quite funny, because, you know, the viewpoints of like German and Austrian newspapers as compared to English newspapers sometimes quite interesting. What other advantages do we have? Why are entertainment media good? Well, if we consider Netflix and all those other television streaming services and so on and so forth as entertainment media, we could also definitely go for the language aspect. It's so easy nowadays to watch stuff in English, or like you can also watch it in original versions anyway. I think one television series that is very famous at the moment on Netflix is House of Money. Is that what it's called in English?
House of Cards?
Yeah, that's a different one, but there's a Spanish one as well. I only know the Spanish title, but is it House of Money? House of Money. Anyway, it is a Netflix series, but the original version is in Spanish, and suddenly all of the world, like people all over the world, started to watch the whole thing in Spanish. Hugely popular. I could tell you a Spanish title now, but that won't get you anywhere. So I guess the language aspect is a good thing. You can watch stuff so easily in English. When I was your age, kind of thing, there was like once a week there was a cinema in Innsbruck that would show movies in original version. So nowadays I guess that's definitely a plus point that speaks for entertainment media. The language of the whole thing is English, and that's very good, or so I think. But I have to say that I'm an English teacher, so I got to say that that's one of the great advantages. One of the great drawbacks is, of course, the fake news aspect, or something a word that I very much like that came up together with Donald Trump. There is something like the Americans coined the term, of course, after the election of Donald Trump, because he doesn't take the truth that serious, or not always. So there's something like an alternative reality or an alternative truth, which makes it quite hard for newspaper readers and for television spectators to find out what is true and what is not. He is the president of one of the most important countries in the world, but obviously not everything he says is factual. He sometimes kind of mixes up some facts or alters them so as to fit his purposes. So alternative reality and alternative truth is kind of the same thing than the fake news are, but the fake news were there before Trump. The alternative reality is something that he and his government kind of coined, and that his opponents, they live in a kind of alternative reality, and the opponents of Trump have kind of coined the word. So the big question is, who is my source, and is this source reliable? Is this a credible source? Yes or no? Probably it doesn't necessarily have to be, but usually the better the quality of the newspaper, or the more the more serious, the more quality there is in a radio channel or in a TV channel, the more credible, plausible the news are. Like the more there's a good research, or there was like thorough research done on that. And if we can figure out what is true and what is not in the big media landscape, then if we can, as I said, then we can probably, or should probably, stick to the more high quality stuff. What else? Well, one thing that people say that is a big disadvantage, traditional media. I never liked that word. Well, as I said in the beginning, people don't read newspapers anymore, that much at least. They also don't listen to the radio that much anymore. Also, television is in decline, but only television as we know it, like ORF 1 and 2 and RTL and Vox and all those stations, because there are so many streaming services, because there is Netflix, because there is Amazon Prime. People like to watch the media or watch shows of their own choice at their own pace, like with as many breaks as they want, which is a clear advantage of entertainment media over the traditional media. As I said, some people predict the downfall of especially newspapers. TV will always be out there, or will be out there for a longer period of time, but maybe newspapers aren't that much anymore, or that's at least how very pessimistic people put it. What are the other... Well, I think that's the most important thing. Well, yeah, interaction, so the opportunity of like talking to people in blogs, for example, is definitely an advantage, but well, there's also a lot of people who spread like wrong opinions, or who try to convince people about points of view, about standpoints that are not, are kind of difficult to like prove and difficult to explain. So there's a lot of wrong opinion and a lot of wrong opinion making out there. There's always people who believe the fake news that people talk about, or all those very radical opinions to one side or the other. So I guess nowadays, because it is so easy to interact with other people and to talk to other people, clear opinion making is harder. Like we get so much input, so many sources that we can get our information from. It's probably quite hard to make up our own minds, really. Well, that's a quite obvious one. Modern entertainment media would be social media mainly, and as I said, streaming services and computer games. That's what is modern entertainment media. One of the most classic advantages and a big impact, of course, it's also that is a distraction. People watch Netflix for entertainment. People play computer games for entertainment. They play online computer games for fun. They do it for distraction. I think that watching a good, an episode of, I don't know, well, Game of Thrones might not help you to get distracted from your stress, but something on a slightly lighter note than Game of Thrones maybe. All the series that I watch are so terribly serious. What fun series is out there? Are there any fun series out there? Orange is the New Black, for example. That's not that terribly serious. I think that's kind of more like distraction kind of thing, and gives you a nice break from studying and so on and so forth. You get them very quickly. On television you wouldn't, if you don't want to wait for the next episode of How I Met Your Mother at 6:30 in the evening. Then you're definitely better off with modern entertainment, using Netflix or Amazon or whatever you use. Especially one point that usually is very much in favor of especially computer games is the creativity point. I didn't think about that, but I had to research my stream, and that's what I found. So one argument in favor of computer games especially is that people who play them obviously get more creative in different problem solving, but also in drawing and depicting landscapes and all the fancy creatures that you have to kind of fight against, and all those fake, unreal worlds that there are. I don't know. But that's obviously scientifically proven. So the more computer games you play, the more creative you are, in a nutshell. So, or at least that's what people say. I don't know. I don't play computer games, so that's why I'm so uncreative. Do you play computer games?
No.
Oh. He's a very, very bad source. He can't prove my point, unfortunately. But the computer, the gamers out there, you can maybe prove the point or not. But obviously there's some research saying that those people or people who frequently play computer games are usually quite good at developing stories and stuff, because that's what they see or have seen in their computer games, which is quite cool. Same holds true for strategic thinking. That's also one of the points that's in favor of computer games. The next one is something that holds true for all modern entertainment media, especially social media, especially Instagram in this case, if we believe the bad newspaper or the bad press coverage about Instagram, that people get wrong role models. You can use a lot of filters on Instagram. Usually the pictures that you see are not a depiction of reality. People appears to be suddenly appear to be incredibly beautiful. In reality they are not. So, especially young kids. Kids don't have Instagram, I suppose. Teenagers who are easily influenced by role models, like the Kardashians, as I already mentioned them. You might also get the wrong role models simply because, as I said, people don't look reality is different to what they put or post on Instagram. People's lives are hardly ever that perfect. People tend to only post perfect pictures and fun stuff on Instagram. We don't lead lives like that, so that's where they set wrong role models. But so as to not to totally condemn any kind of social media, I still think that they're a lot of fun, that they're a very good source of information as well. Quick information is better than no information at all. And as I said, I think that the the consumption of proper newspapers and TV shows is definitely going down. I don't think that many people watch the Zeitungsbild anymore, but would rather rely on Facebook to give them the news that they need, that they want. So I guess that all forms of media do have their reason to be. I hope that I could give you some insight into the topic. One thing that I would recommend, as you are probably all quite internet savvy and know your way around Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and so on and so forth quite well. Most of you probably also have Netflix and Amazon Prime and stuff like that, and can easily point out the advantages and the disadvantages of the respective things. I would, if I were you, before the exam, I would familiarize myself with the old media. So the concepts of yellow press journalism, of tabloids and broadsheets. What does the radio do? Why was the radio so influential? There's some very interesting stories out there. There's also, nowadays people think it was a hoax, but many, many years ago there was a person who read out a play on television. It was an author called H.G. Wells, and he read out a play, or one of his relatives read out a play actually, but he wrote it, and it was called The War of the Worlds, and suddenly people started to believe that there was some danger of a war going on, only because he read out a play on the radio. So it was quite influential at some stage. People were actually listening to it and actually thinking about it. So I would do some research into that, and I guess with the rest you're experts anyway. And with that, I wish you... No, I tell you what's going on next week. Next week there will be demonstration exams about the topics. I will try to do 2 different ones. So one of the exams will focus on the traditional media. So there will be some questions about newspapers, and I don't know who my partner will be next week, but whoever it is, he or she will be asked about newspapers and newspaper consumption and so on and so forth. And the other one will probably be about the internet and the more traditional media. With that, I thank you for your attention and wish you a good night.